Yes, this is a very special moment. In fact, in many ways, it's a climax of the campus, because it's becoming a tradition now that the president of the jury comes out here, and last year it was Roland Emmerich. This year it's Charlotte Rampling. And she is remarkable and very valuable, I think, to young filmmakers, because she's worked with such a range of major filmmakers, from Luchino Visconti to Woody Allen, from Sidney Lumet to Alan Parker, from François Ozon to Nagisa Oshima. And Alan Parker has said that for the character of Margaret Krusemark in Angel Heart, he needed someone, and I quote, enigmatic, beautiful, and very classy, all of which Charlotte is. And I think that's really the perfect introduction. Charlotte, you started in the swinging 60s. In some quarters, there's a revisionist theory that people sat around in the lotus position and smoked pot all day and dreamed up ideas that were completely utopian. And then there are others, like Richard Lester, who told me last year that he found a diary for August 1965 when he was doing the Beatles films, and said, I did more in a week then than one would do in a year today. What are your memories of that period? Was it good to be a good time to start your career?
I think there was a sense of freedom then, and a sense of possibility, which perhaps we haven't, nobody had quite experienced it in this way before. The freedom being that we were all born during the war or just after the war, and there was all young people didn't have to go to war again. And so we put all that energy into breaking boundaries, opening doors. There was a sense of potential. There was a lot of money around too, but we didn't need the money so much. We knew that we could all get jobs. We could all do things just through creation. That's what we thought, that's what we felt, and it was largely true. It really, there were the possibilities there to do completely innovative things, to talk about feelings, to talk about what cinema really is supposed to do, to talk about social issues, to talk about racial issues, to talk about all the things that cinema hadn't really talked about in a way before. They'd made stories around them, but we felt that we were able to start telling the truth.
And you were one of the first actresses of your generation, as I recall, to take the risk of making films outside England, in Europe. And particularly, I'm thinking of The Damned, Visconti. How did that part come about for you?
I'd made a film in London, in England, called Georgie Girl, which was quite a powerful film on the swinging 60s, where I played a very outrageous character, a very rebellious character, which seemed to be the sort of, it seemed to correspond with who I was at that time, and so it was very much typecasting, but quite good typecasting. I then made an Italian picture with Gianfranco Mingozzi, who just came out of the blue. I was looking for subjects in England that were more truthful, that were more not just making movies to have fun, but to make movies that were actually trying to say something a little bit more powerful about the human condition. And Visconti sort of saw these two films. He saw Georgie Girl and he saw Kidnapping, it was called, with Franco Nero, Gianfranco Mingozzi directed in Italy. And so he asked to see me, and it was quite a strange meeting, because I was 22 at the time, and right in the swinging 60s, I had a skirt up to here, or hair all over there, and little boots, and I stormed into his office, not really knowing who Visconti was, because I was not so, I watched films, but I certainly learned films as I became a filmmaker. I learned them afterwards. I didn't know much about cinema, and I didn't really know who Visconti was. And so I was sort of almost quite outrageous, saying, but I mean, I've read this script, and it's a woman of, almost 30, she has 2 children, it's this, I mean, why me? What am I doing here?
I think he
almost?
saw your inbuilt elegance, and
Well,
this in our first extract, we're going to have a little extract when you finish.
One more thing he said, what he said, because it did actually send me on my way into feeling that I could, he said, you speak through your eyes, so you can play anything and everything as long as you believe in it. He said he went like that.
Yes, well, that's very true. So this extract shows you at the beginning of the film with your husband, Herbert, who's one of the goodies in this film. The Damned is about the struggle among a family in Germany for control of the weapons and metallics industry during World War II, and starred Dirk Bogarde alongside Charlotte and Ingrid Thulin. So could we have the first extract, please? What was he like to work with, Visconti? Was he temperamental?
I think he adopted me, really. He saw that there was something, I think, in the way that I was, that he could become a teacher if I wanted him to become a teacher. I mean, he said to me, I think that you have the potential to have an extraordinary life in cinema if you wanted, and Hollywood will gobble you up quite soon. And he said, but there are different ways of making films, there are different forms of integrity, there are different forms of understanding what you really are doing and taking responsibility for what you're doing. And almost he said, you know, if you watch me, perhaps you'll have a possibility of having other choices, which is making other cinema. Because Visconti at that time was obviously a great master in his country, but he was absolutely not considered particularly important in a lot of parts of the world, especially America.
And were these films, like the Damned and The Night Porter, we'll see a clip from in a moment, were they shot in English or Italian? Did you go do post-syncing?
The Damned was shot in all languages. We all spoke our own languages, and then it was dubbed after, because in Italy at that time, they dubbed all films, so everything was dubbed. Even Italians were dubbed. They did everything afterwards. Nobody actually used their own voices in that time. That was the end of the 60s. And The Night Porter was the first film. Dirk insisted if we did this film that we would do it we would have a VO, a version originale, a direct sound film, yes. Which was very difficult because the Italians didn't know how to do it, so there was always constant noise and people hammering things in and building sets around when we tried to have silenzio. But we did, we got it, and that was, I think, one of the first films that was made in direct sound in Italy. Yeah.
Was it coincidental that you also made The Night Porter with Dirk Bogarde? I mean, was he also working more and more abroad at that time?
He was, and I met Dirk when we were doing The Damned, and it was actually because of Dirk I did Night Porter. Mm. He said he would only do it with me when he saw Liliana Cavani again, because he had Liliana Cavani's script of Night Porter 3 years before, and he'd refused it. And then one night he was watching television, he saw one of Liliana Cavani's film by chance, he saw the credits, which is an extraordinary film called Milarepa, and he called her up, and his sort of reading on the screenplay had changed, and he said, I'll do this film because I found the girl. Mm. And so he said, when she said, who is it? And Charlotte Rampling, the producers didn't want me, nobody sort of, you know, I wasn't a name or anything. But so he took me to Rome and introduced me to Liliana Cavani, and that was it.
I think that's probably the first really challenging film you had, that all the way through. You have a lot of very, very crucial and very difficult scenes to play, and it really established you as a major actress, I think.
Perhaps, yeah.
It's, so we have the next extract, and it's quite a hot one, so it's made this film something of a cult classic, which is often revised. So can we have the next? Was that done over many takes, or carefully choreographed?
That was the first scene we did, and I arrived. We had no rehearsal time. I had to learn the song in one night, and we did it the next day.
And no post-syncing, it was post-sync, that was your voice?
That was my voice, yeah.
Yeah. Impressive. Impressive, you've got a good voice.
And I don't speak German. So it was quite a challenge. But that's what we're here for.
But Dirk made quite a speciality of those Nazi officers, didn't he? Or sort of those sort of detached characters who could perfectly.
Well, he had a personal investment in these stories, so it was important for him to come back onto that terrain.
More than any actress of your generation, again, I think you work with a wide selection of directors. And next up really was Woody Allen in Stardust Memories in 1980. Again, had he seen you in some European films? Because that was quite an unusual casting for him to take you. And when he takes an actress, he really goes for them, doesn't he? Really
yeah, but I think the the basis of all Woody Allen's work is European. I mean, he says it himself. I'm not saying anything, obviously, you know that. And I think he, certainly at the beginning, made the most European forms of American films, that's for sure.
And Stardust Memories is very much an echo of Fellini's 8.5, isn't it? It's
yeah.
a filmmaker's...
autobiography.
Yes, autobiographical, the turmoil of making a film and are you doing the right thing and so on. What was he like to work with compared with a director like Visconti?
I mean, the same, all people who are so different, and when they're making films about something that is absolutely essential to them. So that form of absolute needing to express what they feel is essential, you come up with exactly the same feelings about the man or the woman that's who's doing this. And if you engage completely in what is essential for them, because it becomes essential for you, because you're part of, in a sense, his fantasy, his dream that you have to incarnate and become the incarnated image of what he's been dreaming about, then the relationships between director and actor it's if you decide that it should be that, it's like it's one person.
Does he rehearse a lot, or does he try to get the spontaneous?
He says that it's all improvised. It's not, but there is a form of improvisation with Woody Allen which is particular, because he starts to say, just do it as you feel, do it as you feel, do it as you feel, and as you hone down, you know that you're actually doing it as he wants.
Yes.
But he allows you the freedom to be able to think, and because he needs that too. He needs your spontaneity, and then it hones down into what he feels is his vision, which it is. The film has to be about the director's vision.
Well, I've chosen a short extract from this one, which shows you posing in close-up in a number of different poses, which are then cut by him very rapidly. You probably remember the...
Can I just say one thing about this one? It was this moment is the perfect moment. When I saw him for the film, he said, "I want you to play my ideal woman." I said, "Okay. What's this for you, Woody?" So, well, it's obviously somebody who is totally neurotic and is actually only livable with for 2 days in a month. And this was one of the days in the month that Dory, the character I play, was just in her absolute splendor and completely normal. And we had to do this scene about 5 times over a 5-month shoot. I kept coming in and out from Europe to New York to film it, because he could not find the way to express a perfect moment. This is his way.
Okay. Fine, can we have the next extract, please? So New York was halfway to Hollywood, and then you went to Hollywood, and among the films you made there was Sidney Lumet's The Verdict with Paul Newman. And Lumet has a film here in the Berlinale. Have you seen him yet? Has he arrived? Or?
Well, his film's in competition.
Yeah. Well, I won't say any more then. But what was he like working with, compared with European directors, say?
He's an extraordinary technician. What he does with the actors is he has them all 2 weeks before. And we rehearse the entire film. We go right through for 2 weeks in a huge rehearsal room, almost as big as this. The one we had in New York was very big. And so that the actors are completely locked into the feeling of their role, not necessarily the technique, so that when he shoots very, very fast and furious. And the actors have no time then to speak to him about the emotional content or should I do it this way, should I do it that way? Because all that has been evacuated in this two-week rehearsal time, which I've never had on another film. I've only had this with Sidney Lumet.
I think that goes back to his Playhouse 90 days and 12 Angry Men, when live television in America was so important. And Paul Newman, was he great to work with?
Paul Newman was... I mean, he's a very fragile man, and he's a very he's an extraordinary man. He really is. He has.
Because we have this image of him driving racing cars and so on,
but
in fact he's very shy, isn't he?
He's very, very shy and actually very fragile, and all his. I think this is probably what we all are as artists. If we're not absolutely terrified, we don't get out of the house and we don't do things. And I think the terror, if you can transform terror into a form of creativity, that's when it becomes really, really interesting and powerful.
You also played the affectionate guardian of a gorilla, didn't you, in Max Mon Amour, directed by Nagisa Oshima, which I remember seeing in Cannes. But then it was distributed in France, but not all that widely elsewhere. But it was a lovely film. It had a completely offbeat character?
Well, it's become a sort of, because it wasn't, I don't know, it was released in the 80s, I think, and they were sort of thinking it was going to be, especially Nagisa Oshima, who'd made 2 extraordinarily erotic films. They thought it was going to be like pure eroticism around the story of a woman and an ape, or, excuse me, a chimpanzee. And when it was shown in Cannes, they were all sort of sitting ready to go. And in fact, it was a superbly poetic film about, about the impossibility of a beautiful woman finding affection and love with a human being, and so she chose a chimpanzee.
I quoted Alan Parker at the start, and he gave you this really lovely cameo part of Margaret Krusmark, the fortune teller in Angel Heart, which starred Robert De Niro and Mickey Rourke. And perhaps we could see it, and then you'd like to comment on working with Alan. Could we have the next extract, please, if it's ready? Alan is one of the few British directors who really made the transplant to America and made some really good major league films there. And he recalls it was incredibly hot shooting this film. Did you have to go on location, or was this all done in a studio?
No, this is all New Orleans, as New Orleans was then.
And it was hot, wasn't it? Was it hot?
Yeah, we were sweating,
Yes.
which was good for the film, because it's...
But you were lucky you were able to do that scene and the other. There's a scene of you getting off a bus or in a bus, probably very quickly. And
yeah, I was there. In fact, when Alan asked me to do this film, and I'd known Alan in the 60s, and he was sort of a friend, and he said, there is just there's this one scene. It just is one scene, but we just need somebody to make that scene important, because you're talking about Margaret Krusmark all the time, and you just see her this sort of once, actually.
You then you spent a lot of time in France, and increasingly so. Before we see an extract from a European film, Aberdeen, I'd like to ask you about working in France as opposed to America. I mean, is there a difference, basically, in the way they approach cinema in France on set and in the preparation for making a film compared with the big studio productions?
Yeah, it's completely different. The actual fabrication of when you're shooting is not, but the whole infrastructure that surrounds American cinema and European cinema is completely different. European cinema favors psychological content, whereas America tends to leave that sort of quite light.
So it's more challenging for an actress, I would think, to work in a film like by, say, François Ozon, Sous le Sable, than it is
I chose Europe because, as Visconti had said, I could have a success in America, and I went there in 1970 and spent a year there and made 3 quite forgettable films. But it did show me that America was not my place. It was not a feeding ground for me. I felt more and more isolated and more afraid and more out of place. And I went back and then fell in love with a Frenchman and lived in France, where cinema was doing well, as far as I was concerned.
Well, you also made a film for someone who I admire very much, because I've written a lot about Nordic film, and that's Hans Petter Moland, who made a film called Aberdeen with Stellan Skarsgård, who has been to the campus, I think, and he and you play former lovers who've had a daughter, and it's a very gritty film, sort of film Michael Winterbottom could have made, and set in Scandinavia, but your scenes take place, very tough scenes, because you're dying of cancer, you're in a hotel bed, and you have to register everything by little moments of dialogue, but mostly by facial expressions. And so we're going to see a brief extract from Aberdeen.
But the woman who is dying has to get her former lover and her daughter together. He's an alcoholic, and the daughter is all over the place, and the only way that she feels that she can die is by getting them. So it's a road movie, and they eventually end up in Aberdeen just before this scene, very much towards the end of the film.
So it's a moment of almost reconciliation.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, was there a language factor?
The disappointment for me for Aberdeen is that it didn't find an audience.
It started off very well at Carla Vivari. It won a big prize, I remember.
It was at Toronto. In fact, it was at Toronto when I was there with Under the Sound with François Ozon, because I made them about the same time. And it never really found its market. I think afterwards, films like that, because it's a very beautifully made, powerful film, that's where we're lucky now with having DVDs, that we know that we can find films, and whereas before we couldn't. Video we did, but before, so films always do have a second chance, they really do.
You mentioned the psychological aspect of European filmmaking, and I think that your career in the last few years has taken this quantum leap upwards, in many ways due to one man, François Ozon, particularly with two films, Sous le Sable, Under the Sand, and Swimming Pool. And could you tell us a little about him and how you met him and what he's like to work with compared with other directors?
I'd just like to say something before that about François Ozon. The film that you've seen, and a film I did with Jonathan Nossiter, you know his work, just made Mondovino. I did a film called Signs and Wonders, another film that is a very, very brilliant film but didn't find its market. And before that I did The Cherry Orchard with Michael Kakianis. And these are three films which I began to make again when I started to feel the desire to make films had been lost somewhere, and I had to go walking in the desert, I guess, as they say, for quite a few years. And the coming back was by Michael Kakianis, Jonathan Nossiter, Aberdeen, and something I did on British television. I played a very, very well-known character in Dickens called Miss Havisham. And those four films brought me towards, in a way, because things are always, people say it was François who, it's all about meetings, but I was ready to meet François. I was ready to journey again in cinema, and François arrived after those three films and just said, look, I've got this story about a man who disappears. You know, he just disappears in the sea and we don't know what we're going to do. And I said, well, then what happens? And he said, well, we're going to film the first part about his disappearance. So we filmed the first part in 6 weeks,
This was Under the Sand.
This was Under the Sand, the first film I made with François Ozon. So we filmed the first part, and then he thought we would get the money because he would show the first part, and this, you know, going up to the moment when the man they go to the beach and the man disappears in the sea, the husband disappears in the sea. Well, it so happened that as there was sort of really no story, the people would say, well, what's going to happen now? And François would say, well, she's going to deal with it. She's going to sort of, we're going to just sort of find out, really, what happens. We have no really story, plot, or line, but it's about absence. It's about the trauma of disappearing when somebody literally disappears. So we waited 6 months before we did the other half of the other 3 quarters of the film, and so that's how that was made. Nobody wanted it. We did it for almost nothing, and I think
rather reminiscent of L'Avventura in the sense that the woman disappears at the beginning in L'Avventura, and then they spend. And I think he must be an admirer of Antonioni because everything is understated. And
I think it is a good parallel actually with L'Avventura. The story around it too, how it was made.
I think what I meant when I said that it really, in our eyes, gave your career a new impetus was that you're on screen in those 2 films, Under the Sand and Swimming Pool, virtually the whole time, which must be very, very challenging for an actor because you have to be not only so many lines, but so many scenes, you have to be there much longer, whereas if you do something like Angel Heart, you pop up for a few days and then you go off again and do something else. But those must have been really enveloping films, envoûtant, you know, in French. Really
well, I think I was ready for it. One of the reasons that I didn't take on some projects is because I didn't feel that I had the stamina, the emotional, physical stamina to do certain things. So I turned down quite a lot of work over a period of time. And this was, in a sense, it's why people said, oh, she's finally come back, because it was almost an autobiographical story. I mean, François sort of took the camera and just followed me. And I mean, he obviously had the script. I'm not saying that it wasn't a completely constructed film, but it was about just finding out how a woman goes through this experience, because neither of us really knew. We had a storyline, but we didn't really know what could happen.
Swimming pool really made a stunning impact, and of course brought you the European Film Award for this, as well as a lot of other kudos, as Variety says. And it's a film on which you're on screen virtually the whole time. You have a rather unsympathetic character in some ways, in that you start, as in Bergman's Through a Glass Darkly, the writer spies on his own daughter. You begin to start spying on this young girl who is the daughter of your publisher, and you're in his house and writing and looking for inspiration, relaxing, and you begin to see in her the germ cell of a book, and so you begin to start spying. And the extract, the final extract we're going to see, shows you starting this process. Could we have that extract, please? I know you have a very tight schedule, so I've got lots more questions to ask you, but I think we should give the talents a chance to ask you some questions. And we have microphones, so can you identify yourself and get one of these microphones, and let's have the first question.
I would like to know, it must be quite hard to judge on films in general, so how do you rely on, when you judge the films in the competition, are you relying more on your feelings, or you're trying to find some kind of rationale to it, or how are you trying to judge the films?
Through feeling, really uniquely through feeling, and then through the feeling, the content becomes either really interesting, extraordinary, experimental, conceptual, and then it's the coherence amongst that I think in the end makes us in the jury come towards the same decision. There's a form of expertise on all levels, but it starts, and I told them all at the beginning, I want you just to stay there as open as you can and be gutted or not by what you see, and then we can talk and not be too analytical.
Another question?
Yeah, just a short question. Did you ever think about directing, or did you direct?
No, I haven't directed, and I haven't thought about it.
You never wanted to?
I don't know, I'll never say never. Yes?
Is there a difference between offers that women of your age get in the United States and in Europe? Are there more offers for women of your age in Europe?
Absolutely, yeah. In Europe, it's not an issue, it's not a problem. In America, it is.
You touched on, You touched on the difficulty of some of your films to find a marketplace. In this sort of day and age of sort of global release, simultaneous DVD release, etc., it seems to be that films are expected to make an impact straight away. So with these more complex films, as a sort of, how do you see the future of actually getting out these sort of slower release type of films?
Well, as long as places like this exist where you are, Berlin, the Berlinale, and important festivals that have film markets, there is a platform so people can see them. Then the next thing that has to happen is that each individual country has to learn to support its arts. And if the individual country doesn't support its arts, doesn't help them, doesn't actually create a container through which artists can work and express themselves and have their films released, even if it's only within their own country, if they learn how to make films within their own country, then those films will go to many festivals, many beautiful, fantastic festivals all over the world where, like you in a group, you all get together and we see them. Then this will keep those types of films alive. If we don't have this, they won't. But for me, it's each country has a great responsibility towards the arts.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, what's the best thing and the worst thing that a director can do on set when you're working with them?
Best thing. Should we start with the worst or the best? You need to feel when you're on the set, so therefore working on the scene, and you're about to be filmed, you're about to do the scene. You need to feel that you are absolutely the most important person in that moment in the eyes of your director. You have to feel completely safe and protected. You have to feel that you will not be abandoned. So in a psychological way if he understands. Not all of them do. But if you feel they don't understand, then you have to try and make them understand what your needs are. And in my case, it's a need of feeling absolutely protected so that I can go as far as I possibly can, which I have no idea what that is, but at least feel that if I do just completely get out of control, which might be very good for the scene, that he will catch me. And it's only him because he's the one that's looking at you and he's the one that is visualizing everything that you're doing. So was that the best or the worst?
That was the best. And the worst would be when he ignores you completely.
The worst is when he ignores you. always behind his combo, because they always are. I know that it has now, because I made films when we didn't have, they were always, a director would be intimately watching you as you played. Now it's not the same, but it doesn't matter that. You still find other ways, obviously, through technology to find the human being, so it's not a problem. But the worst is, and I wouldn't work with a director like that, because I talk a long time with my directors before I do a film, so I know the beginnings of a relationship. And if I feel that there's wars, I won't do the film.
Another question? In the front.
Okay, I have a question. To what do you attribute the differences between the filmmaking cultures in the US versus Europe? Obviously, you've mentioned that you've had some difficulties in the United States and you prefer to return to France. Can you elaborate on these differences in filmmaking cultures and why was it difficult for you in the US?
Sorry, your question was the difference in filmmaking cultures?
Yes,
Yes,
and
between
why
Europe
was it?
and the US.
Between the United States and here?
And yes.
Because we're only talking about the United States and differences. I haven't made films in Asian countries yet. I hope to. I hope Korea and China will perhaps call me one day. That I would love. But I've made many films in European countries, in different European countries, and I think we mentioned it before that it was, it's about delving deeply, much more deeply into the human condition, into social conditions, into political conditions, and trying to tell the truth. The point of view of the director might not be accepted, but at least he really gets in there and tries to tell the truth. That's the difference between America and here.
Thank you.
Is it also as simplistic as saying Europeans want to produce art at its best and the Americans want to produce entertainment at its best? I mean, this is
Yeah, I could say that.
a matter of money too, I should think.
Well, it is an economy. We're in an industry. Filmmaking is an industry. You cannot do it. A painter can perhaps, scrape a few paints together, but a filmmaker needs a bit of money. So it is become an industry, and that's fine. So you have to surf within that and see how clever you can be to make your films.
There's a lady in the front row here.
Hi, Sybil.
Hi. Are there any long-lasting effects of the night porter on your career? And second, it has been shown in Germany only twice, in 1974 and 78 in a release. It has been a big influence. It has had a big influence on our generation, on my generation. And can you do anything about a new release of the night porter?
Do you think it should be re-released?
Pardon?
Do you think it should be re-released?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Well,
Because the whole
maybe we'll
discussion
start
is-
campaigning then, if other people want it re-released on the big screen.
But what about the long effects on your career? Was a problem in the States, was a problem with everybody else in Israel? and
So
so
I've
on.
had this with a lot of films. Maybe, obviously, with Night Porter, it was at the beginning of that particular engagement, the engagement I guess I've always had about making films that speak very loudly in a dangerous voice and move and criticize, but just to never be complacent, I think, is my motto. To never compromise. So if I embark on a subject, I'll go right to the end of that, and I will hope that the director does too. And I think most of the films, the finer films I've made, the director has gone right to the end of his journey.
Is there any character or person you would like to impersonate in a film that you would long to show, to play?
You mean a living person?
No, just any character, not necessarily a living person.
Well, of course, this is what
Which
I make cinema for.
Which one?
I don't know. I wait for people to come and choose me. I don't
you would
choose
not.
them.
I think she may be meaning, just as you did Miss Havisham say for Great Expectations, is there a historical character?
No,
or
I don't
a
think she
figure?
did mean that.
No?
Did you mean a historical character?
No, I didn't
A living
mean that.
character? No, I don't think she did.
No, just your personal longing for maybe any character that you would like to impersonate.
I've been incredibly fulfilled already.
Okay.
I feel I've... Well, which doesn't mean to say that I'm, going to sit down and not make movies. I hope until I die I'll be making movies, but I don't know what they'll be. That's the surprise. I have no expectations, and I hope for everything.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sorry. Have you ever made the experience and work with a director that he betrayed you about his original intention?
Where are you speaking? I can't
It's here.
Oh.
Have you ever made this experience about betraying you about the original intention? So like Tchaikovsky did, he invited an actor, didn't pick him up for due days or things like. How do you think about such approaches between directors and actors and actresses in the work?
Some people work well under a certain form of torture, mental and physical. It brings out very powerful things in them. I don't think it's necessary, but I know that some directors think it's necessary, and they choose people that are willing to go through a torturous journey. I choose my subjects to be torturous, so the journey that I go through them, I need to be protected. I need to have, as I said before, I need to work in a very, very loving environment to be able to give the performances and give body to my subjects. I can't work either with hatred, resentment, any form of torture. If it gets too much, I'll just tell the person, and if we can't work in any other way, well, then I'll just leave the movie.
Well, we have time for one more question.
Good morning, Ms. Rampling. My question is, how do you decide about whether you play a role or not? And whose opinion do you have, or do you consider choosing your characters? And not only the characters in film, but also the characters you play for photographers, such as Jürgen Teller, for example. Thank you.
It can be either a director who you know and like and admire his work, who comes to you and says, I have a subject, would you read it? So that already has some weight, because you know that his particular world, his vision of the world is something that corresponds to your own world and your own vision of the world. But then if the part is something really sort of that I just don't feel I can go there, because for many different reasons, then I won't do it. But if you get a screenplay from somebody whose work you don't know, maybe they just have short films like you're all doing here, but the script is really intriguing, and also I watch a lot of short films, a lot. My son is in the business, and I really follow what is happening. And then it's a feeling that comes through, and then you start to get attached to that feeling for the character, and then you talk with the director, and then. But it has to be a love affair. It has, as I said, I have to work with a lot of love. I cannot be out in the cold when I'm working. It's too frightening. So you work on that. You fall in love with the character, and same with photography. Yes,
well,
one more? No.
One more, okay, one more.
Hello, I'm here.
Yeah.
We're talking about movies. I would like to know if you have ever worked as an actress on a stage theater, and what would you like?
Yeah, I have
that?
just recently, but only recently. I trained at the Royal Court Theatre after I was discovered on the streets in films. I started films when I was 17 with Richard Lester in the Knack. And then I went to film school because I felt very guilty. I didn't know what to do, or I thought, because English actors are very trained and they all go to long schools, so I went to the Royal Court Theatre. But then films kept coming, and I was a little frightened to go on stage, and I thought this was too exposed, and I felt that I wasn't ready for it. So many, many, many years passed until actually last 2 years ago, I first went on stage for a play that was written for me in Bernard Giraudot in Paris, written by Eric Emmanuel Schmidt. And then after that, the National, Jonathan Kent at the National. Right after that, I played for 4 months in Paris. And then right after that, Jonathan Kent said that we're doing a Marivaux, which I thought was really quite strange, as I live in France, and Marivaux is French, but they were doing a 30s adaptation of Marivaux at the Littleton Theatre, which I did right after. So I had 2 years intensely in theatre just recently.
Well, Charlotte, you've been very, very kind to take time out from your schedule to come here. Everyone appreciates it enormously.
So do I. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
And
I
thank
really
you so
appreciate
much
it.
for coming.